Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take these techniques of making 2D drawings and hatching to make a drawing that we're going to take into Illustrator. So essentially, I've turned on all my layers except for the unroll layer. I've turned them all on. And now what I have is I have this object, which I'm going to say it's my building, and essentially I'm going to make a section through here and cut the section. I'm going to use a clipping plane, and I'll explain why in a second. But there's two different methods that I use to give this object actual thickness. One of them, I exploded the entire thing and used offset surface. So I have a bunch of individual offset surface or poly surface. The other way I did this one is I used the command shell, which it gave this entire thing a thickness. Neither of which is perfect, but it's going to require just a little bit of work. But just so you can see the two different ways of doing this, or at least these two different ways. I want to turn my clipping planes on. So I select them, go to Properties, Clipping Plane, turn them on in perspective mode. So now what I want to do is I'm going to select both of these. Go to my front view, and from my front view I'm going to type in Make 2D, current view, maintain source layers, and hit OK. So now if I come into my top view, because I used my clipping plane to make a section, the nice thing about that is if I look at my layers now, I have Make 2D visible. I have a layer that's called clipping planes, and I have a layer that's called lines. Wherever this clipping plane is located, where it's cutting through where it's cutting a section, it actually puts all those lines in a separate layer. So for example, I have all those lines in this layer, and all the lines that are behind it are in a different layer. So this is essentially where it's cutting through my design. This one is in a separate layer. And again, this is essentially where it's cutting through my design. So in both cases, I need a little bit of work to do to clean up this drawing. In this case, I have to use trim. I'll just select everything. To essentially just come in here and just trim everything away. So this is where my section cut is happening, so I want to trim everything inside of there away. And then I'm going to have to fix little areas that are like this and like this. You know, in this corner here. The way I would fix those, I would delete those lines. I would use fillet with the radius of 0. That line to that line, and it'll connect those. Same thing here, fillet that and that, and delete those lines and fillet that curve and that orange curve. and then just start to fix and just start to tweak some of the other curves that are on here. Or I can use my shell profile, do the same thing. So you turn off the lines. Use trim. I think this one's in a little bit better shape. This one is just mirroring just this line. So I'm going to take this and do offset through point. Click on that point, and again use trim. Trim that. I'm going to select the entire thing and hit join. I'm going to make sure these are all in the same layer. Oops, wrong way. That should be in the clipping planes final design layer. And here it's actually showing like the inside parts of the lines. So I have to just come through here and just delete these. To make this easier to see, I can change this layer, clipping planes final design, change it to a different color. It'll make it a little easier to see. So not a lot of work, but just a little bit of tweaks just to make the drawing read a little bit better. I'm actually going to get rid of a couple extra lines just to make it read differently. Here I'm going to use extend. So actually that's the basic setup for my drawing. Here's the final version of it. So let me just walk through the rest. So essentially I want to have this inside part hatched. Now put that on hatch 1. So I'm going to select those lines, type in hatch, click inside there, make it a solid. So it hatched that part, and I'm going to put that in hatch 1 layer. Make sure the hatch is going in hatch 1 layer. There you go. And then what I want to do is I want to have another hatch that's essentially the ground layer. So I'm going to draw a line. I have ortho turned on to help me out. Let's see. I have object snapped on, or smart track. If I click there, or not click, just highlight it, and I start to move my mouse. There you go, there's the intersection, and it should snap back. So you turn on the points. There you go. So now essentially what I want to do is I want to hatch in this bottom part. But before I do, you can take a look over here. I have this separate line that is a ground line. So I'm just going to retrace this. I'll show you a separate trick that I use sometimes. Just a second. So once I retrace that, I'm missing a part from there to there. Holding down Shift to select both curves and joining them. Now I can put that in the ground line layer. Change object layer. So I can have that to make a different line weight. I'm going to select, type in hatch. Select all of this. Click inside here. And enter. Make it into a solid. Select that and put that in hatch 2. And essentially I'm done. I can delete that original curve that was just there to help me out. And then the last thing I have is just a building outline curve. So again, I can retrace this if I wanted to. And that I'm going to put in building outline. Change object layer. Sometimes what I'll do as a trick, so instead of having to retrace everything, what I'll do is I'll use this as an example, the one right next to it. I'll make a square, a rectangle around my drawing. I'll use the hatch. I'll select everything, but I'll click on the part in between my drawing and the rectangle and make that into a solid. And what I can do with a solid, I'm going to move that hatch out of the way. If I explode a hatch, or if I explode a solid hatch, what it does is it gives me a surface. And I can use the command duplicate border to select this. And what duplicate border is it gives me a 2D drawing of the perimeter of my surface. So I can delete my surface, and very quickly I can get a perimeter drawing of it. And I can just move this back, put it in a separate layer, move it back into place, and now I can use that. Or essentially what I can do is I can do what I did here, is I can use the split command by point. Oops, by point. I can split it along that endpoint and that endpoint. So essentially what I have now is I took that overall outline, and now I split it into 2 separate curves. Let me delete this. So now if I move this back into place, I can now use those 2 lines when I take them into Illustrator, and I can set up those line weights something separate. So something similar to what I did here. So once we finish this, I'm going to take this drawing into Illustrator.